And that leads into our next talk from Jason Anderson and Andrew Zeiders, talking about utilizing offenders crews to support riparian restoration. Jason Anderson is a riparian ecologist for the Stillaguamish Tribe of Indians Natural Resources Department. He currently manages projects focused on riparian restoration in the Stillaguamish River Basin, with a focus on invasive plant control, native vegetation installation, native plant production, and monitoring. In addition to the riparian projects, he has managed on teams to implement construction projects for fish passage, in-stream wood structures, and wetland mitigation. Prior to working in the realm of habitat restoration, Jason served as a Peace Corps volunteer at the Institute of Forest Ecology in Zvolen, Slovakia. He holds a bachelor's in aquatic wildlife biology from the University of Montana and a master's degree in freshwater ecology from Western Washington University. And Andrew Zeiders works as the restoration crew lead for the Stillaguamish Tribe of Indians Natural Resources Department and has served in that role since 2015. As the crew lead, he implements riparian restoration projects, directing offenders work crews. Andrew received his BS in ecology from Seattle Pacific University. Andrew and Jason, thanks a lot.
Just a quick note, Andrew and I have prepared this presentation together, so we will be switching off from time to time on some of the slides. What we'll be speaking about today, as you can see by the title, is our experience working with offenders crews in our riparian restoration program. As it was kind of mentioned in the introduction, we do work for Stillaguamish Tribe Natural Resources Department, and so many of the project examples that were shared today by some of the presenters this afternoon are very, very similar to the projects that we undertake. We do focus our efforts mainly in the Stillaguamish River Basin. And a quick side note, some of the introductory titles of the slide you'll notice are in quotation marks, and that's very unique to us because, as you can kind of imagine, working with a group of inmates over time, we kind of get an education from some of the things that they say amongst themselves or to us. Some of those things we can't really put on public slides, but the ones that we feel that were pertinent to today's presentation, we are going to try to share with you. And so we'll try to give a brief description of what each of these title quotations mean. Okay?
Yeah. Utilizing an offenders crew. Here's our quote. Where are we going? What are we doing? That was a quote every single day that one of the offenders would ask us as we showed up. So this is our outline slide. So we'll be talking about what an offenders crew is. We'll compare and contrast them to a traditional contractor, and like Byron used a WCC crew. I'm sure a lot of you practitioners have used WCC crews. So we'll kind of compare and contrast that. Nuts and bolts, what does it look like on a day-to-day basis to work with them? The pros and cons of working with them, and then also the benefits of collaboration. So kind of what does the tribe get out of it, and what do the offenders and also the correction officers get out of it? Then there will be a short video after we get through it all, and Jason will talk about that, and then we'll transition into our Q&A. So, what does a typical crew like? We've got usually 6 to 8 crew members that come out on a daily basis with one corrections officer. It is a all men's program. It is a contract through Monroe Corrections Complex, so it is an all men's facility. As all of you know, with COVID, things have changed a little bit. So instead of a 6 to 8 man crew, it's 4 to 6 now, based on trying to get people in a van. They come outfitted with very limited gear and PPE. It's pretty basic. And so they don't come with much. And they also come out in a 2-wheel drive van. So when you're going out to these work sites, don't forget your tow strap.
Okay, so like Andrew mentioned, there are a number of different ways in which we can get restoration completed on the ground, right? We can use our staff members, contractors, volunteer programs, and of course, as what we're talking about today, of course, offenders crews. Now, at the Natural Resources Department here, we have utilized all of these different methods. So essentially what we're hoping to do is kind of share some of the things that we've learned today, just to kind of give a little bit of background on the unique parts about working with an offenders crew. Okay? So same, but different, right? This is a phrase that has come up more than once. It kind of highlights the fact that, yeah, it's similar in a sense, but then it's different. So, this is our compare and contrast slide. So what I want to do is just make sure we're all on the same page. So sharing, some ideas about these different types of contractors. So a traditional contractor, right, that's the person or the company that you would hire to do a specific job. They come with their own materials, their own labor, and get the job done that's specified. And oftentimes they're selected through some kind of a competitive bid process. That's what I kind of mean by a traditional contractor. Now, a WCC crew, Washington Conservation Corps crew, is another means of a contract crew, as Byron alluded to in the previous presentation. So, AmeriCorps crew, as you know, is essentially composed of maybe 4 to 5 workers and then a crew supervisor. And those workers serve for a defined duration, maybe a 6-month or an 11-month term. And then after the term of service is complete, then the crew will turn over and there will be a new crew. An offenders crew, like Andrew mentioned, is made up of, say, 6 to 8 men who are supervised and transported by a corrections officer. They don't come with tools. They have limited PPE, and so they perform basically non-skilled type labor, okay? And it's an unskilled labor primarily for the benefit of the community. So the similarities that you might see between a traditional and AmeriCorps and an offenders crew would be the fact that they all perform services under a work agreement or a contract. There's an invoicing mechanism for paying them. There's a defined work day, defined work hours that they work, and there's an organizational structure or a chain of command where you have a boss, so to speak. Okay. But there are some major differences, of course. Like I mentioned before, the offenders crew really doesn't come with a lot of tools. They are in prison. They're not just coming from their homes. And one major difference is with a traditional contractor, of course, once the job is complete, the job is complete, they're done, they go away to the next job. AmeriCorps crews and offenders crews are somewhat similar, just in the sense of they are coming back to the host agency every day, and they're completing tasks that are lined out and organized, led by the host agency. Okay. So then, kind of begs the questions, are offenders volunteers? Well, again, kind of, sort of, same, but different, okay? With some groups of volunteers, the level of experience can vary dramatically depending on who comes out to work on a given day. Say, for example, if you are running a volunteer program for a planting or an ivy removal project, you never quite know what level of expertise, experience, or skills that group of people is going to come with, okay? And for those groups that are familiar with volunteer programs, there is a certain level of staff coordination and logistical support to help support those volunteers to get the tasks done that you'd like to get done during the day. Okay? So those are some ways that they're kind of sort of similar, but in a sense, no, definitely not. Offenders are not volunteers, right? In one sense, they do receive an hourly gratuity. Okay, so they do make some money while they're out working with us. And again, another stark difference is that they do live come from prison. So they work together during the day and then they go home together in the evening they eat and recreate together. They're always together. They just don't go home to their own individual homes.
So that leads us to the next slide and kind of our position as contracting with them. Are we project managers or volunteer coordinators? Well, the answer is yes. We act as a crew lead, a volunteer coordinator, an educator, and we also are a laborer alongside them. So even though we have a contract and therefore they are a contractor, they come as a general labor force and are not trained or specialized, so they act a lot more, like Jason was saying, more like volunteers in that sense, where you have to train them up. So you have to be out with them pretty much on a day-to-day basis, teaching and training, which leads to my kind of position as a crew lead, where I'm out there on a regular basis with them, showing them exactly what we need done, and then doing training on how to properly use tools and that kind of stuff. And we also act as educators. We're out there teaching them plant identification. We're teaching them mostly aspects of all the restoration, so planting, mowing, how we want to take care of plants, the plant ID, the reason why we're out there doing what we do. We're not just out there killing weeds and planting trees for no reason. Yeah, we are out there doing it for salmon recovery. And then, like we said, you're also a laborer. We are hired to do this job, and so we go out with them and we labor alongside them, which allows us to also build rapport with them, which helps in the long-term motivation of those guys. You're not just sending them out to do the nasty mowing reed canary grass, digging blackberries in 38-degree weather, pouring down rain, and just pointing your finger and saying, good luck, go do it. We're actually out there doing stuff with them. And so on a day-to-day basis, we're pretty much filling 4 types of hats, and while we're interacting with them. So, typical day. On a typical day, the crew leaves the facility around 6 a.m. And they have to be back in by 2. So the correction officer will grab the guys. They will leave the facility and they will arrive to our field station that we have set up for them. It's a place where they can keep their gear. They can get have their breakfast there, and basically get ready to go out and meet us out at a field site, which then once they get their gear, we'll either meet up with them at the field station or at the field site, depending on if we've been there or not with them. So we'll go out, line them out for the day. Hey, this is what we're doing. We're weed whacking today, or we're planting today. In a typical day, we get 4 to 5 hours worth of work, depending on where the site is, how long it takes to get there. And they usually work for about 2 hours, take their lunch break, work for another hour or 2, and then go back to field station and then return back to their facility, and which they have to be in by 2. So there is definitely a time constraint. There's no kind of fudging the time frame on a typical day with them. And I'm sure all you are wondering, what do they eat for lunch? This is a highly sought after lunch. All right. As you can see in the top left-hand side, there is this lovely wrapped piece of bologna. It's not quite as good as some of the bologna that was previous before COVID. They would affectionately call it buckshot beforehand. You'd end up with little pieces of peppercorn in it. And then you can make your sandwich, you know, with bologna, a little bit of relish, some cheese, and then your bread. Then, of course, for your second sandwich, you can have peanut butter and jelly. And, or you could, you know, take the hard-boiled eggs, crack them up, make an egg salad sandwich, get some chips, gotta have your fruit, gotta have your fortified beverage. Got all the good stuff for you.
Kind of like Tang.
Kind of like Tang or Gatorade. And dessert. So now that that's over, what are interactions with them? You need to set expectations early and show them exactly what you want. So you need to have a good and clear line of communication. And that needs to happen with both the correction officers and with the offenders. Your correction officers are going to know the guys really well, going to know kind of how they function as a group, kind of an insight into their lives. So having a good relationship and a good open, clear communication with the correction officer goes a long way. And just like you would any other professional relationship, you need to treat the offenders the same way. They are contracted to come out and do a job. They have limited training, so you're going to be training them and doing that. But they come out as if it is a job, and they want to work and they will work for you. And as long as you just treat them with respect and get to know them and understand what is appropriate in a professional relationship, it goes a long way to build rapport with them. And you end up with really well-motivated crews. And along that line, you typically end up with a quote-unquote crew lead, who is one of the offenders who's usually a natural leader and motivator for the group. And the correction officer can help you out with that and kind of figure that out. Or you just observe it and you just see a lot of the guys kind of looking up to somebody. And it goes a long way to really make sure that you have a good interaction with that person as well, because they can keep all the other offenders on task if you're not there for the day, and just kind of keep them doing what you're going to need to be doing on a day-to-day basis and do it properly with the way you've trained them. And you know, you got to trust them in what you teach them and go out, but you always have to verify too. So always do an inspection, you know, when they say that they're done, and have them redo anything that's not up to spec. One example of that is we had a good site. Guys were doing their thing, and I was walking through doing a plant inspection, and I was like, oh, that looks funny. Reach in, look at some plants. I'm like, huh, those are two different species. Wait, no, pull it out. 13 bare root plants in one hole. So it's not all rosy and good, and you do need to inspect and make sure that they're not trying to pull a fast one on you, and just get out of the work. So how we doing, boss? So here's the pros and cons, or some of them, for working with the crew. One of the pros is a very low hourly and daily cost for the time of the offenders and the correction officer. You end up with really enthusiastic workers. They are excited. The crew guys are very excited to be outside. You know, as you can imagine, being in prison is not enjoyable. And so having the ability to come out and be outside and do work, kind of put your head down and do that, goes a long way for them. And then you also get oversight of training on your programmatic priorities. So for us, some of those priorities are safety. I mean, that's a huge one. You basically get to train them in weed whacker safety and just general safety and maintenance while you're working with equipment. You get to train them on, hey, you know, it's a windy day, we're not going to be working out in the woods. We, as in multiple presentations earlier, you know, there's trees that fall, and it's just not safe to be in the woods at certain times, and being able to pass that on and let them know, like, hey, you know, you can train them exactly how you want things done and when it's safe to be doing things. Some of the cons, the logistical support is intense because they don't come outfitted, they don't necessarily come trained, they need you to go out and be with them at each work site and make sure that there is oversight in that. You also end up with worker turnover. Most of the offenders who come out with us have 3 years or less left on their sentence. And so some guys you'll have on the crew for 3 years, and it's great. You know, train them up once or twice and they're good to go for the entire time. Other times you end up with guys who are in there for less than 6 months and they are only there for 3. And so you end up having to train workers and go over stuff multiple times often. So it just takes time. And then you end up with lost productivity because the workday includes from the time they process the workers in and out of the facility, and then travel time to and from the field station, and then also your travel time from the field station out to your site, however long that is. So those are some of the pros and cons, but overall, I think we think it's highly beneficial for both sides.
Agreed. Right, so, you know, what does Still Tribe Natural Resources get out of this? And as you can see, we do have that task-trained team of workers that is trained up and able to go out to a lot of our work sites to do the labor associated with riparian restoration. Has been an ongoing partnership since 2015 with State Department of Corrections. So we do feel like there's a benefit to this, to outweigh the costs or the cons, if you will. Of course, the crew does get laid into the facility for certain periods of time, and that can be related to inclement weather, when travel conditions are unsafe to transport them. Or it could be, of course, during COVID times, we experienced a very lengthy However, at the end of the day, our department does have the ability to affect a large number of acres throughout the Stillaguamish. So, kind of turning the coin on that one, what do the corrections officers and the workers get out of it? Well, first and foremost, they work outside as opposed to in a prison, and their enthusiasm does show when they're out working with us, even on days when the weather is quite poor. And they are able to work individually, especially during the times when it's appropriate to just put your head down and weed whack and get your work done. But then also we do present this as a team opportunity for them to come together to work efficiently, cooperatively to get the tasks done that we task them with. At times, things don't always go to plan, and we have to change things up and problem solve in the field. And, you know, that goes both ways. Andrew and I have learned a lot of things from these workers because a lot of them do come from a working background or a blue-collar background. They're not afraid of working. They're not afraid of rolling their sleeves up and getting things done. And a lot of them are very, very savvy when it comes to solving problems. Learned a lot from them in that sense. And one last thing that I think it's important is we do get to share with these workers and the corrections office exposure to a tribal perspective when it comes to land management or habitat restoration, all natural resource management, tribes' natural resources. So with that, we'd like to share with you a short video. This runs for about 1.5 minutes. I'll narrate as we go through here, and this is probably a good time to collect your thoughts. And if you do have any questions, go ahead and put them in the questions, and we'll go ahead and see about answering those in a little bit. So what we're looking at is some footage of one of our restoration sites. This is a wetland site near Fish Creek, and this is roughly a 25-acre site that the Defenders crew has been tasked with planting and maintaining. It's a multi-year site in terms of we had to phase the planting over 2 planting seasons. What we're looking at is we're traveling from north to south, and as we go along, what you'll see is some of the progress that they've made in certain areas with reed canary grass control. There's some large patches of reed canary grass. Byron, if you're still on, you might recognize the lay of the land. It's very similar to the project site you're sharing with us. So this kind of gives you a sense of these guys out working. You know, they're again, working individually and yet working kind of collectively as a team, they've come up with kind of a game plan in terms of how they're going to approach the site. Okay, and you know, they're kind of responsible for each other, and the corrections officer is not necessarily standing right over them every single minute of every single day. That would be impossible on a large site like this. You know, he's in the community, but guys are largely self-motivated, working hard, and doing a really good job. And it's been a very beneficial program that we've been able to collaborate with Department of Corrections on for the past 5 years. So with that, we'll conclude. We want to thank you very much for your attention. I know it's the last presentation of the day, and we did get off to a bit of a rocky start, so I thank you for your patience on that one, but happy to answer questions. And if anybody has any very specific questions, please feel free to email us.
Thank you very much, Andrew and Jason. We do have some questions. One person is wondering, are there certain offenders who cannot participate in your program based on their crime?
The answer to the question is yes. The Department of Corrections has a very structured way in which they select certain offenders to participate in this program. In fact, the section of the Rural Corrections Complex is composed of minimum security release inmates, and only those folks within that particular camp could even be eligible to come out for this program. And then beyond that, not only do they have to be part of the camp, but then they have to go through both psychological and physical evaluations to make sure that they are vetted to be able to come out and participate.
Could you compare the costs and productivity for the correction crew versus the WCC versus contractors? Or do you have an idea of the weekly costs for the crew?
Sure, yeah, well, let's put it this way. The cost for the offenders crew does vary, and it basically varies on the number of workers that come out. But I would say it's probably around $450 a day. So it's roughly half the cost, say, of a Washington Conservation Corps crew. And the majority of that cost does go for the correction officer's salary. Very difficult, I would have to say, in order to try to compare output or throughput for amount of work that could be done. So I would say they work hard. They do work very hard, and they're on task. Once they arrive, they're moving, they're going. The corrections officer has them going. There's not a lot of stand around time. We can get a lot done with them.
Yeah, I would say you get a solid, that 4 or 5 hours of work is pure work out of them.
Who do you contact about getting one of these correction crews to come out on your site?
You know, that's a good question. I would have to say the first thing to do would probably take a look at where your work site would be located, and get on the Department of Corrections website to find out where the different facilities are. And I would suggest probably trying to start making an initial inquiry with someone within that facility who would be within, say, component of the corrections department that would be kind of a public relations type person to try to get that initial contact. I know each individual facility is a little bit different, and so we only really have a good idea with the folks at the Monroe Corrections, but there's other facilities throughout the state that offer similar programs.
And can you specify how long this program has been running with Stillaguamish and about how many acres you have treated?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, how long have you been working with the correction crews, and approximately how many acres have you restored?
We started working with the State Department of Corrections crews in 2015, and I would estimate the number of acres we've worked on with them over the course of time would be in the.
Well, you cut out there at the end. What was that?
Okay. We began working with the Monroe Corrections Complex in 2015, and my estimate of the number of acres that we've affected would be in the hundreds. Each
Wow.
site is unique, of course. Some are weed control sites, some are planting sites, some are weed control and planting sites. So throughout those different combinations, yeah, we've affected many acres.
Have you ever worked with the correction crews to apply herbicide?
At this point in time, no. No, we have not. That is an element where it does kind of introduce a little additional risk, mainly because of the nature of the fact that these workers are not, don't have their pesticide application licenses. So up till now, we've elected to utilize Snoqualmie Tribe Natural Resources Department staff who are licensed to do herbicide application.
And there's a question saying, I'm wondering how you guys chose Department of Correction crews over WCC. What was the decision-making process for that?
Well, you know, that's a good question. I wouldn't say that it was a choice over Washington Conservation Corps. When I was first hired 10, 11 years ago, at the time, the tribe's Natural Resources Department was contracting with Snohomish County corrections crews. And so for about the first 5 years when I worked here, we would work with the county corrections crew. And then around 2013, 2014, the county discontinued that program. And my supervisor at the time said, hey, what about the State Department of Corrections? And so we pursued that. I think it was one of those types of situations where this department had kind of a long history utilizing corrections crews or offenders crews. And in previous jobs, I have worked with Washington Conservation Corps crews for many years. So I don't want to present it as a this one's better, this one's better. They're just different. I feel that each one brings its own unique set of skill sets and level of experience to the task of riparian restoration. It's the intent of this presentation is just to kind of explain the model that this Snoqualmie Tribe Natural Resources Department has pursued. It's just different. Same, but different.
Okay, and the last question is, are the crews made up of mixed genders or are the crews single gendered? And based on your experience, would there be any concern or issues having oversight executed by the opposite gender or non-binary?
Sure. So they come from an all men's facility. And so the crews are exclusively made up of men. And I don't think we have had any issues, and I couldn't imagine there being any issues with that. And if anything did arise with, say, non-binary, like a crew lead or something, I think the officers would squash that very quickly, and that crew member would no longer be allowed to work on that crew.
And I would add one additional comment to that. We do have several female staff members in our work team that regularly interact with the corrections officers and the crew members, and we haven't had any issues that have come out of it. The corrections officers and the workers essentially a professional working relationship.